At my son's rehearsal dinner in Charleston, they parked my old pickup behind the catering trucks and sat me by the service door. When no one was looking, my future daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered, "The greatest gift for our wedding is if you disappear from our family, Dad." My hands shook, but I remembered my late wife's words. Silence can be strength. That night I slipped the erased program into my coat and called my lawyer. She had proof of a forged deed and a recording Marla never knew existed. The wedding day was coming. I could stay quiet. Or I could let the truth speak in front of everyone. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I'll know how far my voice reaches. The gravel crunched under the tires of my old Ford as it rolled into the country club parking lot. Chrome and polished black sedans lined both sides, their mirrors folded neatly like proud wings. My truck, faded red with a dented fender, looked like it had wandered into a world that no longer spoke my language. The evening air carried the scent of azaleas and cut grass, Charleston's springtime charm on full display, but none of it eased the knot in my chest. Inside, laughter swirled through the wide foyer, echoing against the high ceilings. A chandelier scattered light across polished floors. Guests carried themselves with practiced ease, as if they belonged here. My boots felt louder than they should have, a reminder of how far I stood from their world. Near the entrance to the dining hall, a long board displayed the seating chart. Names written in elegant calligraphy glistened under soft light. My eyes scanned for mine. Elwood Rayner, father of the groom. It should have been at the head table, beside my son. Instead, I found it tucked near the bottom, next to the service door. The sting hit sharp, like a cold slap. The head table held names I didn't recognize. Guests brushed past, their perfumes trailing, their conversations rising above me. A few glanced at my place card as though it confirmed something they'd already suspected, that I was here, but not truly of here. I caught sight of Darrell across the room, shaking hands, grinning with the confidence I once thought he learned from me. When his eyes met mine, he waved, quick and distracted, then turned to another guest. Marla approached with clipped heels, a smile polished thin. "Elwood, could you move those wine boxes to the side? They're blocking the servers." Her tone carried no malice, just dismissal. I shifted them without a word. To her, it seemed natural, assigning me tasks better suited for staff. Darrell brushed by a few minutes later, whispering, "Dad, make sure you sign the guest book." As if I might forget. His eyes didn't linger. He was already scanning the room for someone else, someone more important. The MC's voice called out, gathering everyone for announcements. Names rolled off his tongue, those giving toasts, those introducing the couple, those honored in the program. My name was absent. The omission landed heavier than the first insult. I wasn't just moved from the head table, I was erased. Later, in a quiet corridor lined with portraits of men long dead, Marla stopped me. She fussed with my boutonniere, fingers brisk against my lapel. "Elwood, no speeches tomorrow. It's simpler that way." Her eyes didn't soften. Even when they met mine, she leaned closer, her perfume sharp, and said, almost sweetly, "The greatest gift for our wedding is if you disappear from our family." The words slid in deep, colder than the draft slipping through the hallway windows. I didn't answer. Silence has a weight of its own. On the veranda, moonlight washed over the marshes beyond the lawn. The night hummed with frogs and crickets, sounds more familiar than the chatter inside. Memories of my wife surfaced, her laughter, her hand slipping into mine at gatherings like this. She would have told me to hold my head high, still, the ache of being unseen, unwanted, pressed hard. Back inside, I placed a small hand-carved jewelry box on the gift table. Cherry wood, sanded smooth, lined with felt. I had carved it myself, the way my father once carved keepsakes for me. Inside, a note. "May you keep what matters." It wasn't for Marla, or even for Darrell. It was for me, a reminder that giving doesn't need to be recognized to endure. As I stepped toward the exit, my eyes drifted back to the seating chart. My card had been nudged again, farther down, near the very edge. The room spun with polite laughter, none of it reaching me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a name, Corinne Havelock. I pressed it to my ear and whispered, steady despite the storm inside. I might need your help tomorrow. Morning light crept through the blinds, striping the small room where sleep had only brushed me in fragments. Corinne's voice still echoed from the call I had answered the night before, calm, steady, a promise that I wasn't imagining things. She hadn't asked for details, and I hadn't given them. Just her quiet, "I'll be ready when you need me," lingered. A thread of reassurance I clung to. I pulled on my jacket with care, smoothing the sleeves as if fabric could armor the bruises left by words. The truck coughed awake, louder than I wanted, drawing glances as I parked again among the gleaming sedans and polished SUVs at the country club. My old pickup looked like it had stumbled into the wrong neighborhood, but I forced my shoulders straight. Inside, the air carried a chill of perfume and fresh-cut flowers. Staff hurried with trays. Bridesmaids in matching robes flitted past like bright birds. I slipped into the prep hall quietly, telling myself that if I just stayed present, maybe they'd remember I was still family. Laughter rippled near the projector. Guests were gathered around for the slideshow, a collection of Daryl's life in photos. My steps slowed. On the screen, my son's childhood unfurled, him at 5 blowing out candles, at 10 in his baseball uniform, at 16 with his first car. Familiar moments, yet unfamiliar too, because every frame had been cropped or chosen without me. Applause followed each smiling image, people murmuring about what a proud father must feel. I stood in the shadows, pride twisting into something hollow, not a single picture of me teaching him to fish, or holding his hand at the state fair, or standing by him at graduation. My face had been erased from the record. I forced my eyes to the floor until the reel ended, then slipped aside before anyone noticed my hands trembling. A wedding planner and a headset passed by, stacking printed programs. "Here, sir, take one. Check if we spelled names right." I accepted the sheet, scanning through lines of elegant print. Names floated in neat order. Officiant, bridal party, parents of the bride. My gaze stopped cold at parents of the groom. Daryl's name was there, paired with Judith Armitage. My name was gone, replaced as if I had never existed. The paper crinkled in my grip. Another cut, clean and precise. Judith herself appeared, pearl earrings glinting. "Isn't it better this way?" she said lightly, smoothing her skirt. "The club prefers things tidy. Too many names can look cluttered." Her tone was all hospitality, but her eyes were cool, telling me this was no accident. I nodded once, not trusting my throat to form words. I found Daryl by the refreshment table, catching his elbow. "Son?" I whispered, sliding the program into his hand. "Look." He scanned it quickly, then shoved it back. "Marla and Judith organized all that. Don't make a scene. Dad, please." His eyes darted around the room, desperate not to draw attention. My chest tightened. Silence had always been easier for him than standing beside me. Then Marla appeared, dazzling in her fitted dress, greeting a bridesmaid with laughter before turning to me. She leaned close, smile fixed for the crowd. "It's easier this way," she whispered. "You won't embarrass us." The words landed sharper than any shove. Behind her, glasses clinked, and a cheer rose as if the world itself agreed. My role as father had been stripped in plain sight, replaced with polite cruelty. I pressed my lips together, folding the program with care until it was a neat square. It slid into my coat pocket like a kept secret. Evidence, I thought. One day, someone would need to see it. Outwardly, I stayed still, calm as stone. Inside, gears began turning, slow but deliberate. On my way out, I passed the projector again. The slideshow was looping, but then it stuttered, froze, and the screen went stark white. For a heartbeat, the blankness filled the room. Blank is better than a lie, I muttered under my breath. Stepping into the corridor, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered, then pressed Corinne's number. The ring buzzed in my ear, steady, like a drumbeat before battle. The phone screen glowed in my hand, Corinne's name waiting for me to press call. For a moment I almost did, but my thumb hovered and froze. Something inside whispered that I needed to try with my own son first, before dragging outsiders into what still should have been family business. I slid the phone back into my pocket and made my way through the winding hallways of the club. The morning hum filled the place, staff wheeling trays of champagne, groomsmen laughing too loudly, cousins darting past in pressed shirts. But beneath the noise, my focus narrowed to one thing: finding Daryl. Near a dim storage corridor, I spotted him alone, fiddling with his tie in the reflection of a brass doorknob. I pulled the folded program from my jacket and held it out. Take a look. He barely glanced. Dad, not now. They're running late with setup. Read it, I said, firmer this time. His eyes finally scanned the page, then darted away. Silence stretched. The son I had raised with Sunday baseball games and long nights of algebra homework now stood before me, unable to meet my eyes. It's a mistake, he muttered, adjusting his cufflinks. A mistake that leaves me out entirely. Out of the slideshow? The program? Like I never existed? His jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might apologize, might see me. Instead, his voice dropped to a flat whisper. It's more her house now, Dad. The words cut through me sharper than any insult Marla had thrown. Her cruelty was predictable. But my son saying that, about the home I had poured everything into, sent a hollow ache through my chest. Images flickered in my mind, standing in that same house years ago, papers in hand, signing the check that secured the down payment. I remembered the late nights at the mill after his mother passed, working overtime so he wouldn't lose the roof over his head. That place was built on sacrifice, on love, not just money, and now, to him, it was her house. I steadied my breath, refusing to let him see me crumble. Daryl, that house was built on more than brick, you know it. Before he could answer, heels clicked against the hardwood. Marla swept into the hallway, a glass of sparkling water in hand, her smile too polished to be real. Is there a problem here? Daryl froze, and I saw him shrink back as she stepped closer, her eyes locked on me, sharp as glass. You gave some money once, Elwood, she said, voice sweet enough for anyone passing to mistake it for kindness. That doesn't mean you own our lives. The words dripped with casual dismissal. My chest tightened, but I held her gaze, letting silence speak where anger would have spilled. Then, just as a group of bridesmaids strolled past, Marla's tone flipped. Oh, Elwood, we're so glad you're here, she chirped, resting a hand on my arm as if we were sharing a tender moment. Everything's coming together beautifully, isn't it? The girls giggled, nodding at her graciousness, and hurried along. Only when they were gone did her hand drop, her smile vanish. The humiliation burned, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of reaction. I slid the program back into my pocket and walked away. Her voice followed me, low and commanding, directing staff about floral arrangements as if I were invisible. By the time I stepped outside, the spring air hit me, warm but heavy. My truck sat at the edge of the gravel lot, dented and dusty between rows of polished sedans. I opened the glove box and pulled out the worn envelope I always kept there, the deed papers, still bearing my name. My hands lingered on them. Steady now. If it's more her house, I muttered to the empty cab. Let's see what the law says. This time, there was no hesitation. I scrolled to Corinne's number, pressed dial, and lifted the phone to my ear. Corinne's voice carried calm urgency through the receiver, steady as ever. Elwood, come by my office this afternoon. Don't wait. We need to talk before the wedding. The line went dead, leaving the truck's cab thick with silence. A steady tap of rain against the windshield followed me into Charleston, each red light feeling like a test of patience. By the time I found her office tucked between a coffee shop and an insurance firm, my jaw ached from being clenched too long. Inside, the space smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Hardwood floors creaked under my boots. Her framed degree from the University of South Carolina hung behind her desk, flanked by books so worn they looked like they'd survived battles of their own. I remembered leaning on her counsel when a supplier once tried to bleed my shop dry. She hadn't wavered then, and she wasn't wavering now. Corinne slid a folder across the desk. "You need to see this." My hands didn't want to open it, but I did. Pages of legal language swam in front of me. Then the words cut clear. Prenuptial agreement. Daryl's name. Marla's name. My wife's old savings. The very house I'd helped secure after her funeral, all marked as separate property belonging to Marla. "It strips your contribution clean out," Corinne said, voice firm but not unkind. "On paper, it's as if you and your late wife never touched the place." The heat rose up my neck. For a moment, my chest thumped like it might break. Every nail I'd hammered into that roof, every check I'd written when Daryl was barely standing on his own, wiped off the page. I kept my palms flat on the desk, because my instinct was to curl them into fists. "They want you out legally, not just socially," she added. I swallowed the bitterness down, feeling it burn. "Is my son blind, or just willing?" Corinne didn't answer. She reached into another folder. "There's more." The next page chilled me colder than the first. A deed transfer, stamped and formatted, bearing a signature that looked like mine. "That isn't—" My throat closed. "I know," she cut in quickly, "but it's close enough that a clerk wouldn't blink. It hasn't been filed yet. That's your window. Once it is, contesting it will take months." The air in that little office pressed heavy on my shoulders. Betrayal had one kind of weight. Seeing it etched in ink with my name forged was another. The ground I thought I stood on as a father, as a man, felt like it was being shoveled out from under me. I looked at Corinne, trying to catch steady ground. Her gaze was level, not pitying. "Elwood, if you go loud now, they'll twist this into you being bitter and senile. Let them push further tomorrow. The more public the play, the cleaner your case." Patience. It had kept me alive through years of raising a boy alone, running a shop with pennies, waiting for debts to clear. Patience had been my weapon. I nodded once. Sharp. "They think I'll just fade out," I said. She closed the folder and slid it back toward me. "Then prove them wrong, but on your timing." By the time I stepped back onto the street, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement dark and shining. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I thumbed it open and stared at the message glowing back at me. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. Please, just stay away tomorrow. Daryl." The world tilted for a second. Charleston's traffic blurring in my peripheral vision, my own boy telling me to stay away from his wedding. I let the phone slip back into my pocket. A whisper slipped past my lips, low and steady. "We'll see." The text message from Daryl lingered in my pocket like a stone too heavy to carry, but I carried it anyway. Evening light filtered across the courtyard of the country club, lanterns strung between oak branches swaying gently in the warm Charleston breeze. Guests in linen and silk drifted between cocktail tables, laughter floating in the air as servers passed trays of champagne flutes. Eyes followed me when I walked in. Some narrowed in curiosity, others flickered quickly away. Whispers buzzed like gnats. My old jacket, pressed but worn, made me look like a stubborn relic among the gleam of tuxedos. I knew I wasn't supposed to be here, not after that message, but I wasn't about to vanish quietly. I stayed near the wall at first, nursing a club soda, watching. Marla moved through the crowd with an easy glide, her voice bright and perfectly pitched for polite laughter. Judith followed her lead, hand light on each guest's arm, guiding them toward the image of the perfect family. Together they looked like seasoned hosts, as if this was their home, not mine. I caught sight of Daryl across the way, smiling stiffly, letting himself be pulled into Marla's orbit. I sat alone on the edge of the courtyard, watching glassware sparkle and hearing stories I wasn't invited to join. Every so often, someone would glance my way, offer a nod, then quickly shift back to the center where the real conversations happened. Invisible, but not absent. When I finally stood, it wasn't out of anger, it was simply time. Daryl and Marla were near the fountain, backs half turned toward me, voices low but full of ease. I approached, step steady, glass still in my hand. Daryl stiffened as I neared. Marla didn't flinch. "Son," I said quietly, so no one else would hear, "you may try to erase me, but I will not disappear. Not from this family, not from this house." For a second, Daryl's lips parted, like he might say something, but his gaze fell to the ground. Marla's mouth curved upward in that knowing smirk. She enjoyed every second of my quiet defiance, as though it confirmed how little power she believed I held. Before Daryl could muster a reply, Judith appeared with the precision of a stage cue. "Mr. Rayner," she said warmly, though her eyes stayed sharp, "you look tired. Perhaps you should get some rest. These evenings can be so draining for older family members." The implication hung there, sweet as poison. She wanted me gone. Again, I didn't answer her. I stepped back, ready to reclaim my seat by the wall, but Marla lifted her glass and tapped it with a spoon. The room shifted, laughter quieted. She raised her champagne high, smiling wide enough to gleam. "To family," she called out. "To those who know how to let go of the past and embrace the future together." Laughter rippled around us, polite but genuine enough to sting. My name wasn't spoken, but I was the target everyone understood. Guests glanced at me, some curious, some embarrassed on my behalf. Daryl stood still, lips pressed tight. Heat surged in my chest, but anger was not what I gave them. I set my glass down on the nearest table and said, voice even, "Some pasts are stronger than the present." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The laughter dimmed for a beat. Marla's smirk never wavered. I walked away then, not out of defeat but by choice. Silence could wound deeper than words if wielded right. I heard cousins whisper behind me about my odd stubbornness, as though endurance itself was strange. Let them whisper. The night air outside the courtyard was cooler, carrying the scent of magnolias. I slipped into the shadows, away from the lantern glow. When my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Corinne's voice, calm but urgent. "Call me back. I found something else." I stopped on the gravel path, lantern light fading behind me. The weight of her words settled heavy. I looked up at the sky, stars barely visible above the Charleston glow, and my face hardened. The game wasn't over. Not yet. The morning light crept through the blinds, soft but unforgiving. The memory of Marla's toast still sat in my chest like a weight. Guests had laughed, raising their glasses while I stood there, stripped of dignity. Sleep had done little to wash it away. Corinne's voicemail replayed in my ear for the third time. "Elwood, I found something else. Call me as soon as you can." Those words weren't just caution. They carried a finality that told me my troubles had only deepened. I poured black coffee into a chipped mug, though it went cold before I could finish it. My hands rested on the counter longer than they should have, knuckles white against the laminate. Enough waiting. I grabbed my keys and left the house behind, knowing even its walls felt less like mine with every passing hour. Downtown Charleston bustled with Saturday calm. Flower carts spilled color onto the sidewalks. Couples lingered over brunch, and I moved through it all like a ghost. Corinne's office stood tucked above a cafe, its old brick facade softened by ivy. Inside, the scent of lemon polish hung in the air. Hardwood floors creaked beneath my boots. Her receptionist gave me a nod of recognition and disappeared into the back, leaving me alone with my thoughts until Corinne appeared. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her sharp eyes studied me, then gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. The oak furniture carried a quiet authority, solid, unbending. "Elwood," she began, sliding a folder across the desk. "You need to see this." The folder was heavy with paper. My name, printed in block letters, crossed out in black ink on page after page, In its place, Daryl Kincaid and Marla DeVere. At the bottom, a signature, my signature, slanted awkwardly across the deed transfer. It wasn't mine. The blood drained from my face. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared at the lie staring back. "They've prepared it for filing," Corinne said quietly. "It hasn't gone through yet, but the attempt is clear. If we act, we can stop it. But you need to decide, do you want to fight this here? In private? Or let them play their hand in public?" I leaned back, steadying the quake in my chest. My wife's memory hovered in the room, her voice, reminding me of the nights we pinched pennies to pay that mortgage, how the house was supposed to be Daryl's anchor. And now, it was nothing more than a bargaining chip in his fiancée's game. "I can't let her erase me," I muttered, though it felt more like a vow. Corinne folded her hands. "Patience. Elwood. The more public the betrayal, the more it works in your favor. Timing is everything." I nodded, though patience was a bitter pill. By noon, I was knocking at Daryl's door. He answered and rolled up sleeves, surprise flickering across his face before hardening into irritation. "We need to talk," I said, pressing the folder into his hands. He flipped through the pages with a half glance, then sighed. "Dad, Marla's just making sure nothing slips through your fingers. You've been forgetful lately." The words landed sharper than any slap. Forgetful? No, he was parroting her script. Forgetful doesn't mean forged. I shot back, voice low but firm. "That signature isn't mine. And you know it." Daryl's jaw tightened. "You're making this harder than it has to be. She's protecting the family. Let it go." Family. The word, twisted from his mouth, cut deeper than the documents. I held his gaze until the silence grew heavy. Anger burned, but I refused to let it consume me. "One day, son, you'll realize what you traded away," I said, my voice steady. Each word weighted. Then I turned and walked out before he could answer. The afternoon air pressed down hot and humid as I found myself in a corner cafe. The chatter of strangers filled the space, but it felt like background noise to my storm. I spread Corinne's map across the small table, the house circled in red. My pen hovered, then drew a darker ring around it. The battlefield was chosen. My phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. "Izzy Carr. Elwood. I saw something at the venue. We need to talk before the wedding." The trap was wider than I'd imagined. The late afternoon sun slanted across the columns of the country club, bathing the rehearsal grounds in golden light. It should have been a moment filled with pride. Seeing my son rehearsing for the day I once thought would be a celebration of family. Instead, the weight of Corinne's warning pressed on my chest. Each ribbon, each polished wineglass, each flower arrangement felt less like joy and more like props for a stage where I had no part to play. Vendors bustled, setting up lights and arranging chairs in careful rows. I stood off to the side, unnoticed. My old shoes crunched against the gravel, and more than one server gave me the same look they might give a gardener wandering too close. That's when Izzy Carr appeared, camera hanging from her neck, her sharp eyes flicking toward me with quiet intent. She hesitated, then crossed the lawn quickly, her voice barely a whisper. "Elwood," she said, leaning closer. "I overheard something you need to know." Her words came out hurried, urgent. "Marla told Judith you won't be around much longer, legally or otherwise." She laughed when she said it. "They think you're already out of the picture." The words tightened something in my gut, worse than any public slight so far. It wasn't just money, wasn't just the house. They wanted me erased, as if my very existence threatened the polished story they were writing for themselves. Izzy's gaze searched my face, looking for reaction. I swallowed hard, kept my voice even. "Thank you," I said simply. The way she nodded told me she understood more than she let on. I stayed back, watching. Marla moved through the room like a conductor leading an orchestra, laughing with the florist, brushing Judith's arm as they shared some private joke. Every nod of approval from Judith deepened the sense that I was an intruder in a family I had built with my own 2 hands. Then the rehearsal began. Guests and vendors gathered to watch the walkthrough. I took a seat near the aisle, quiet, unnoticed. Marla's voice rang out, sweet but sharp enough to cut. And as for the ceremony lineup, Mr. Rayner won't be standing beside Daryl. We've arranged a simpler presentation. Judith followed quickly, adding her official touch. Your seat is already set in the back row, Elwood. It keeps the focus clean. For a moment, silence fell. A few guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and Marla. My own son said nothing, just stared down at the floor as if searching for an escape route. The words cut deeper than I expected, stripped not only of title but of presence. No role, no acknowledgement. My chest burned, but I forced myself to stay upright. I nodded slowly, as if they'd asked me something ordinary. The stillness in me unsettled Marla. I could see her waiting for a burst of anger, some scene she could twist into proof of my unworthiness, but I gave her none of it. From the corner, Izzy lifted her camera and clicked. The shutter froze the image, me sitting alone, the ornate archway rising behind like a cruel backdrop. She caught my eye afterward, giving the faintest nod. Maybe. Someday. That picture would speak louder than my silence. I found Daryl near the edge of the room as the rehearsal dissolved into chatter. Son, I began softly. We need to talk. He shifted uncomfortably, voice barely above a whisper. Dad, just don't make this harder. The words landed heavier than any of Marla's poison. My son, my boy who had once run barefoot across our yard, now asking me to step aside for the sake of ease. I turned away before the sting showed on my face. Outside, twilight deepened, cicadas buzzing in the trees. I headed toward the exit, ready to find the quiet of my truck, but Judith blocked my path, her smile tight and deliberate. She leaned in just enough so no one else could hear. Mr. Rayner, she said, her voice smooth as silk. After tomorrow, you won't even have a chair at the table. The threat carried no raised tone, no sharpness, only the certainty of someone who thought the game was already won. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in thin bars of gold, catching the dust that floated in the still air. A suit hung waiting on the back of the door, pressed but plain. Buttoning it, steady hands betrayed themselves with a tremor that wasn't from age alone. The day had arrived, not as celebration but as battleground. The mirror offered no comfort, only the reflection of someone carrying his wife's absence like a shadow. The church bells outside tolled softly, announcing not joy but inevitability. The drive through Charleston's cobblestone streets was slow, every red brick house and Spanish moss-draped oak standing like silent witnesses. At the church, rows of cars gleamed, sleek machines polished for the grand occasion. Stepping from his truck, the whispers began before his shoes touched the stone walkway. Some eyes darted away quickly. Others lingered with curiosity. He moved past them, posture straight, cane firm, making no apology for his presence. Inside, stained glass windows threw colored light across the pews. He was directed to the back, as arranged. No seat near the front, no escort, no proud father role, only a place among distant cousins, where the air smelled faintly of lilies and polish. From across the aisle, Izzy caught his gaze and gave a subtle nod, camera in hand. That tiny gesture carried more warmth than any other he had felt since arriving. The ceremony unfolded with practiced grace. Organ chords swelled, bridesmaids glided, and finally Marla entered, veil trailing, smile fixed. Every eye followed her, every camera flashed, and every whisper hushed. When vows came, Daryl's voice faltered but steadied, pledging faith and unity. Then Marla spoke. Her words honeyed until a line slipped in, sharpened like a blade. I promise to build a future free from old burdens. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some guests shifted in their seats. A few gasps cut the silence. Daryl's shoulders twitched as if struck, though he said nothing. From the back, The words landed heavy. Not just insult, but declaration. The jaw set tight, Kane gripped harder, yet not a sound escaped. Rage was tempting, but dignity demanded otherwise. Memories pressed in uninvited. His own vows, decades earlier, spoken with a trembling joy beside his late wife. Promises of forever, of carrying life's weight together. Now, watching his son stand silent beside a bride who used vows as weapons, the contrast bit deep. A hollow ache filled the chest, heavier than any Kane could bear. When the recessional ended, laughter and chatter filled the air like confetti. The reception hall, adorned with crystal and candlelight, buzzed with energy. Glasses clinked, silverware rang, and toasts began. Then the doors swung open, and Corinne stepped in, not dressed for festivity, but for purpose. In her hand were papers, sharp as daggers in their truth. She cleared her throat, steady and commanding. Before more words of family are spoken, the truth must be seen. She laid the documents on the head table, a forged deed with Elwood's falsified signature, a prenuptial agreement twisted to erase his contributions. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests leaned forward, whispers colliding with gasps. Judith rose, hands trembling but voice falsely calm. This is a misunderstanding, paperwork taken out of context. Yet before she could continue, Izzy lifted her camera, projecting audio through a small speaker. Marla's recorded brag rang through the hall. By next month, he'll be out of the picture for good. The room erupted. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others glared. Marla's face flushed crimson, fury spilling into her voice as she denied, twisted, deflected. Daryl stood pale, caught between loyalty and shame. Across the hall, eyes turned to Elwood, not with ridicule this time, but recognition. He rose slowly, cane tapping once against the floor, voice calm yet carrying. You tried to erase me, but truth has its own voice. The hush that followed was heavier than any shout. Authority not born of power but of endurance filled the hall, silencing even the clinking glasses. Marla tore off her veil, storming toward the doors. Guests parted like water before her fury. Daryl followed close, his voice lost in the storm of her rage. The doors slammed behind them, leaving the hall in uneasy silence. Standing alone among relatives who didn't know where to look, a thought echoed heavy. Vindication carried no guarantee of reconciliation. Truth had been spoken, but whether it would heal or forever divide remained uncertain. Morning light spilled through the blinds, cutting stripes across the worn hardwood floor of my living room. The house felt emptier than ever, though nothing had changed inside its walls. The silence pressed down like an extra weight, and all I could hear was the echo of last night, the gasps, the murmurs, and Marla's furious eyes as Corinne's evidence tore her fabric of lies apart. The coffee pot hissed to life in the kitchen, filling the air with the bitter smell that had marked my mornings for decades. I sat at the table, staring at my folded hands. For a moment, the old thought returned. Maybe I'd done enough harm just by showing up. But then I remembered Corinne's steady voice, Izzy's quiet courage, and the truth laid bare for everyone to see. The phone rang. I hesitated before answering. Uncle Elwood? It was my niece Clara, her voice trembling. I just wanted to say, I saw what happened. I believe you. I can't believe they treated you that way. Before I could thank her, another call buzzed in, then another, cousins, neighbors, even an old church friend from across town. Each voice carried the same mixture of outrage and sympathy. They admitted they'd heard the recording Izzy shared, that the whispers spreading through Charleston had painted me not as the bitter old man Marla wanted them to see, but as a father clawing for his rightful place. Vindication should have felt sweet. Instead, it burned slow and cold. These voices didn't belong to the one person who mattered most. By midday, word had traveled through the community like wildfire. Folks online were already talking about elder dignity, about families who tried to erase the very people who raised them. Someone had shared Izzy's photo of me from rehearsal, sitting alone under the arch, a shadow among the flowers. Comments multiplied beneath it. How could a son let this happen? No man deserves that. The door slammed open. Daryl stood in my entryway, face flushed, tie loose as if he hadn't slept. You humiliated us. His words echoed the venom I knew belonged to Marla. I didn't ruin anything, I said, voice steady. I only let the truth speak. You always think you're the victim, he snapped, pacing across the room. Marla was right. You just can't let go. Let go of what? My hands tightened on the chair. The house your mother and I built, the family I sacrificed for. Tell me, Daryl, what exactly should I let go of? For a heartbeat, he froze, but the wall between us held firm. With a sharp shake of his head, he stormed back outside, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. The ache cut deeper than Marla's insults ever could. A son's silence is one wound. His chosen words against you are another. Late in the afternoon, Izzy knocked gently. She carried a folder and set it on the table. Inside were printed transcripts of Marla's boasts and Judith's schemes. Sometimes truth needs a witness to live on, she said softly. Her eyes carried something close to guilt, perhaps for not stepping in sooner, perhaps for being the one to hold proof when my own son refused to see it. I nodded, grateful but hollow. As evening fell, Corinne arrived with papers of her own. She spoke cautiously, warning me that Marla might retaliate, that legal steps could escalate quickly. You need to decide if this is a battle you want to keep fighting, she said. They're cornered. Elwood. Cornered people lash out. I stared at the documents without answering. Part of me wanted peace, even if it meant silence. Another part, the part that still felt my wife's hand on my shoulder in memory, knew surrender wasn't an option. Night came heavy and still. I sat on the porch, listening to crickets in the yard. Then headlights swept across my driveway. A car slowed, then sped up. Something clattered, glass breaking. I hurried to the mailbox. The metal door hung crooked, a rock still wedged inside. Taped to it was a note, scrawled in jagged ink. Stay out, old man. This isn't over. The paper fluttered in the night air, and a chill ran through me. They weren't finished. The shards of my mailbox still glittered across the damp grass when the sun came up. Someone had taken a stone to it in the night, leaving only splinters and a note scrawled in red marker. Stay out, old man. This isn't over. The words burned, but the silence afterward burned worse. Standing on my porch with that note in my hand, I realized that doing nothing would mean they had already won. By mid-morning I was at Corinne Havelock's office. She motioned me inside without ceremony, her brow furrowed as though she already knew the weight I carried in. Her office smelled faintly of cedar and paper, solid and steady. I laid the note on her desk. She didn't flinch. We file today? She said firmly, pulling a folder from her cabinet. A restraining order against harassment, and we reopen the property dispute. This isn't just family tension anymore, it's criminal interference. My gut twisted. Taking legal action against strangers would have been easy. But against my own son, against the woman he'd chosen, it felt like signing away hope. Yet as Corinne slid the documents toward me, her eyes steady, I forced the pen into my hand. My signature landed heavy on the page. For the first time since this nightmare began, the fight wasn't just theirs, it was mine. Driving back, I stopped at the gas station to clear my head. Judith Armitage found me there, of all places, slipping out of her Lexus with perfect posture, her pearls catching the light. Elwood, she said, voice wrapped in sugar. Isn't it better to let this go? Peace is worth more than pride. I looked at her, remembering every polite dismissal she'd handed me these past days. Peace without respect, I answered, is just silence dressed as surrender. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. She pursed her lips and walked away, heels clicking like a gavel. By the afternoon, the community had taken sides. Marla was already working her web, posting on Facebook groups, whispering in church hallways, telling anyone who would listen that I was senile, bitter, unfit to manage my own affairs. Daryl parroted her words, writing on social media that his father was ruining their lives out of jealousy. I could feel neighbors' eyes on me when I stopped for groceries. A few even repeated the gossip to my face, shaking their heads with pity that stung more than anger, but Izzy Carr refused to let their version stand. That evening, she published photographs she had kept back, the image of me sitting alone at rehearsal, the one of Marla whispering sharp words while smiling sweetly for the crowd. Alongside the pictures, she wrote a simple caption: "Truth has witnesses." The effect was immediate. Some of the same neighbors who had turned away now called, saying they believed me. The tide wasn't fully shifted, but at least I wasn't standing entirely alone. When Darrell showed up at my house near dusk, his face red and his words sharp, the air between us felt like glass ready to shatter. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "You humiliated us. Marla's right. You're just trying to poison everything." I wanted to remind him of every sacrifice, every late bill I paid to keep him in school, every nail I hammered into the frame of the house he now called hers. Instead, I steadied my voice. "If you can't see me for who I am, then maybe you'll only see me in a courtroom." His jaw tightened, his hands balled into fists, and then he turned and slammed the door behind him. The night was still when I sat back down on my porch. A delivery truck rumbled past, leaving a thick envelope on my step. Inside was a notice. Marla had filed a counter lawsuit, accusing me of defamation and instability. My chest ached, but not from surprise. This war had just left the living room and entered the courthouse. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and paper, its tall windows letting in the gray Charleston light. My cane clicked against the marble floor as I walked through the doors. Eyes followed me, neighbors, distant cousins, even folks from church who had come to watch the drama. Each gaze carried its own weight: pity, curiosity, suspicion. A man shouldn't have to defend his place in his own family before the whole town, but that was where Marla had pushed me. Inside, the judge's bench loomed above us. Corinne was already at the table, files neatly stacked, her calm presence a steadying anchor. Across the aisle, Marla sat beside Darrell. Her chin tilted high, her eyes glittering with the same defiance I'd seen in every smirk she threw my way. Darrell kept his hands clasped, his knuckles white, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. When the proceedings began, Corinne rose with the quiet dignity of someone who had carried truth before hostile rooms many times. She spoke with clarity, laying one document after another before the court. "This," she said, holding up a deed, "was filed last month. It bears Mr. Rayner's signature, except handwriting experts confirm it is not his. And here, the notarization was done by someone who no longer resides in this state. A clear forgery." The gallery stirred. Murmurs rippled like wind through dry leaves. My pulse hammered, but I sat still, my cane resting across my knees. Then came Izzy's photographs. She had captured images of me at the rehearsal, sitting alone near the service door, and audio clips of Marla boasting that I would be gone, legally or otherwise. Played in that solemn room, her laughter echoed like nails on glass. Gasps broke the silence. Even the judge leaned forward, brows furrowing. Darrell shifted in his chair, his eyes darting toward Marla. Marla erupted, her voice cutting through the hush. "This is ridiculous." The judge struck his gavel. "One more outburst, Mrs. Kincaid, and you'll be held in contempt." For the first time, Darrell looked at me, not with warmth, not with reconciliation, but with something that cracked the armor Marla had wrapped around him. Doubt. Corinne closed her presentation with simple words. "The evidence speaks for itself. This man was erased, fraudulently and cruelly. The law cannot allow it." When the session adjourned, the whispers in the gallery had changed their tune. Neighbors who once averted their eyes now nodded at me, some even offering small smiles of respect. Yet there was no triumph in my chest. Vindication in public is cold comfort, when the person you long to hear it from remains silent. That evening, at home, I thanked Corinne and Izzy with all the sincerity an old man's voice could carry. They had stood with me when even my own blood had turned away. Still, the house felt unbearably quiet once the door shut behind them. Later that night, there was a knock. When I opened the door, Darrell stood there, shoulders slumped, the weight of conflict heavy on his face. "I don't know what to think anymore," he said, his voice rough. "The evidence, it's hard to ignore. But she's my wife now." "Dad!" She says you just want to ruin us. I let him speak. His words tangled between loyalty and guilt, between love and blindness. Finally, I answered softly, I never wanted to ruin you, son. I wanted you to see me. Just see me. He looked away, eyes glassy. I can't walk away from her. Not yet. But... His voice broke. I'm sorry. Then he left, leaving the door half open behind him, like a wound that wouldn't close. Alone in the stillness. I placed my late wife's photo on the table beside the thick stack of court documents. Her eyes, forever kind, seemed to remind me why I fought, to keep her memory, her sacrifices, from being stolen by greed. At least your memory is safe, I whispered, my voice carrying only to the walls and the photograph. The next morning, as I retrieved the mail, an envelope lay in the box, stamped with the courthouse seal. Inside was a notice. Marla had filed an appeal. I gripped the paper, the words blurring for a moment. Peace, it seemed. Would have to wait. The war was far from over. The courthouse was colder that morning than I remembered. Or maybe it was just my bones, stiff from too many sleepless nights. The air smelled faintly of polish and paper, and the murmur of voices echoed against the high ceiling. My cane tapped steady on the floor as I made my way to the front, refusing to let the weight of years bend me any further. Marla was already there, perched in her chair like a queen stripped of her throne but still clinging to the crown. Darrell sat beside her, eyes down, his jaw tight. The judge called us to order. I folded my hands, steady, while Marla's lawyer painted me as a bitter old man who couldn't let go. But my heart no longer raced at her accusations. I had carried truth long enough to know it was heavier than lies, but sturdier too. Corinne stood, voice sharp as glass. She laid new papers on the bench, bank records, notarized statements, every detail checked twice. Your Honor, she said. These withdrawals were made from accounts Mr. Rayner never touched. Signatures traced back to Mrs. DeVere. Gasps fluttered across the room. Murmurs swelled. I watched Marla's face as the color drained, then flared red with anger. The judge leaned forward, voice stern. Mrs. DeVere, this evidence directly contradicts your filings. Do you wish to respond? Her composure cracked. She slammed a hand against the table. He's a relic. Her voice echoed, shrill, and the gallery shifted uneasily. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The louder she shouted, the smaller she became. Then, from the side, a voice cut through the noise. Enough! Darrell stood. My son's hands shook. His eyes darting between her and me, he swallowed hard. Dad, I can't ignore this anymore. The courtroom hushed. You gave me everything. Roof, food, your time, your sweat, and I let her blind me. I let her turn me against you. His words stumbled but struck harder than any gavel. For the first time in years, our eyes locked without anger, without distraction. Just the space between father and son, crowded with things unsaid. The judge brought order back, ruling firmly in my favor, assets restored, house protected, restraining order granted. Marla stormed out, shoulders tight, whispers trailing her like smoke. When it was over, I rose slowly. Each step down the courthouse stairs felt lighter. Izzy snapped a photo as I pushed open the doors, the light falling across my shoulders. Corinne walked beside me, quiet pride in her stride. Darrell lingered behind, torn, but no longer blind. That night at home, the silence was different, not empty, just settled. I placed my late wife's photo on the mantel beside the court documents. Her eyes, forever kind, seemed to meet mine. Our son finally saw me, I whispered. I sat a long while, Kane leaning by the chair, listening to the creak of the house that had held so much of our lives. Betrayal was bitter, but silence would have been worse. Age had taken much, but it hadn't taken my right to stand. Dignity is not a gift, it's defended, day by day, even when your own blood turns against you. And though scars remain, truth leaves a deeper mark. I did not disappear from my family. I stood, and by standing, I remained.